I'll say this. The Detroit Tigers are one of the best teams in baseball. And I may end up coming to regret that take. But, no, look, I can't. I'll be a victim of the moment. That's fine. The Detroit Tigers are 18-10 right now. That's the best record in the American League. Objectively speaking, they are one of the best teams in baseball right now after a dazzling homestand that included a sweep of the Baltimore Orioles. We are going to talk all about that, and of course, we are going to talk Detroit Pistons. They played 3 playoff games in the last 7 days, so we're going to discuss all of that. Some good, a lot of disappointment, and had they have won on Sunday, I'll let you in a little, how the sausage is made here. Had they have won on Sunday, I would have led off with the Pistons because we would have been talking about a series that was going back to Madison Square Garden, tied at 2, a tightly contested series, and this has still been a tightly contested series. And I'm going to start with the positive, and it goes back to what I said, I think, 2 shows ago, which is, hey, this has been a wildly successful Detroit Pistons campaign. They're finally moving in the right direction. They tripled their win total. Cade has turned himself into a superstar. That's all correct. Now go win a playoff game. Just end the playoff losing streak because it's embarrassing. And honestly, it's actually gotten worse now that they've broken it, and I'm just like, dude, I mean, teams that just aren't that good just win a playoff game, especially an organization like the Pistons, 17 years, it's crazy. Anyway, we're going to avoid that for now. They did that. Game 2 in Madison Square Garden, a game that was really kind of a mirror image of what Game 1 was, where you get out to a lead, you're playing tough, Knicks respond, and then the Pistons just go cold, and that's ultimately kind of been the story of this series is Pistons' inability to finish in the fourth quarter of games, but Schroeder made a huge 3 at the end. Defense held up. Brunson started missing some shots, and ultimately the Pistons won Game 2. So, look, I would be hypocritical if I came on here and said that, oh, well, now they have to do this. No, I said win a playoff game. They've won a playoff game. That's great. That streak is snapped. All the jokes are over. Okay, the Pistons won a playoff game for the first time in 17 years. That's phenomenal, right? But having watched what I watched in the first 2 games of this series, I think a lot of us, now I'm talking Pistons. We're here. We're here now. We're going to talk Pistons. Having watched what I watched in the first 2 games of, can you tell I'm a little bit amped up? In the first 2 games of this series, I think most of us came away from it saying, advantage Detroit. I mean, yeah, the Knicks won Game 1 and the Pistons got completely boat raced in the fourth quarter, but I think we were watching this saying that through 2, for 70% of the first 2 games, the Pistons were the better basketball team. And you were coming back home to Little Caesars Arena, and I've talked multiple times about if a switch was going to flip. Because I was just kind of watching those first 2 games, politely stroking my chin, saying, I find this rather shallow and pedantic. And I wanted to see if there was going to be a moment where, like, I came out of my shell a little bit and really started to get excited with what this team was doing. And there was a moment in Game 3. And part of it is the Michigan connection, so it's a little bit of cheating. But seeing Tim Hardaway Jr. go off for 18 points, I believe it might have even been 20 in the first half, and he was just knocking down 3 after 3. That was awesome. Now, I will admit allegiances have something to do with that, right? Because, any guy from that run of Beeline teams has a free pass, but it's great to see Tim Hardaway Jr. He's had a wonderful career for himself. And Pistons got out to another lead. It seemed like they were starting to roll, and I really think that this is where experience just shines through. And we saw it in both these games where, it's nobody's fault in terms of how the Pistons have handled this, right? But it's true. It's subjectively true that this is not a team with a lot of experience. This is not a team that necessarily knows how to finish playoff games. There's a level of physicality that comes with that. There's a level of mental toughness that has to come with that. And you have on the other side 2 guys, especially in Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, that while they haven't won championships necessarily, they've probably played twice as many playoff games as like the entire Pistons roster, right? And down the stretch in some of these games, they have simply made the plays that the Pistons were not able to make. And I know that that's very kind of simple analysis, but by the time you get to the playoffs, especially in a matchup like this, like these teams are very, close together, right? There's not a whole lot of separation between the 2 of them. You get the impression, man, if they played 100, there's a chance it could be, 55-45, 52-48. I mean, it's really close. I do think the Knicks are a better team in large part because I think that they have more weapons with that kind of 1-2 combo with Cat and Brunson. That's not to take anything away from Cade, but Cade has good players around him. he doesn't have a great number two around him. Now, you would think potentially over time, Jaden Ivey becomes that. I've had the discussion with a lot of people of, can those guys play together? They were playing together under Bickerstaff. Ivey got injured. That's something that we'll talk about in the offseason. But the Pistons dropped game 3 on they had a flurry near the end in which they almost came back. There was a there was a missed over and back call on Jalen Brunson that would have given the Pistons an opportunity to close out the game, or to tie the game, I'm sorry. I'm less angry about that one than I am about game 4 and what happened there. Because ultimately, man, like the Pistons made their run. They couldn't hit a fucking shot in the third and fourth quarter of that game. I mean, they were really falling apart. They got hot in the first half and just couldn't really finish. I did not think it was the best version of Cade Cunningham in game 3. I think we definitely got that in game 2. And I think we got that for a large stretch of game 4. But I think that the meatier game of the two is game 4, what we saw yesterday in Little Caesars Arena. Pistons came out like crap. I mean, there's no other way to put it. They looked as bad from the floor as an NBA team could possibly look. I think they were like 2 for 16 or something at one point from 3-point range. I mean, they just couldn't make anything. And every person I saw, because of the last job that I had, I know a lot of people that live in New York and are Knicks fans. Every single person I saw tweeting about this game at halftime, whether it was a Pistons fan or a Knicks fan, said, the Knicks should be winning by way more than 7. And that gave me a lot of hope because I've seen it. This happens in every sport, man. You let a team hang around long enough, bad things happen, especially in the postseason. Pistons came out firing in the second half. I thought the defensive energy, and Bickerstaff talked about it in between the third and fourth quarter. I thought the defensive energy was tremendous. And I was starting to get those, like, early 2000s flashbacks of, like, these Knicks guys, they were trying to drive the lane. They were trying to finish in the paint. And it's just like you saw 3 or 4 white jerseys that were standing him up every single time. Cade really came alive. I mean, he was the best player on the floor in the third quarter of that game. Pistons lead in the fourth quarter got up to as much as 11. Hardaway knocking down some shots. Like I said, some really good defense. It felt like this thing was about to go back to Madison Square Garden, even at 2. Pistons were going to win their first ever home playoff game at Little Caesars Arena, and first home playoff win in 17 years. And then, I mean, it's been the story of this series. And it kind of reminds me, sadly, of Michigan basketball this year, where we saw them have these stretches where they looked dominant, and you start to get those ideas in your head of maybe this is what can this team be? Like, at this team at their best, they can almost knock off anybody. And we saw a flurry of turnovers and empty possessions. Jalen Brunson started knocking down some shots, had a nice injury there that, he miraculously came back from and started knocking down threes. And then, unfortunately, when you get into these situations in the NBA where everybody can shoot and it gets down to a 1-2 possession game and every basket matters, every touch of the ball matters, everything's elevated. Karl Anthony Towns just throwing 2 of the most ridiculous shots you're gonna throw in. I mean, it was great defense, hands in his face. Both of them kind of fading away from the basket. One of them was a long range 3, knocked them both down. And then the Pistons had an opportunity down 1 to take the lead late in the game. Cade misses a mid-range jump shot. It goes back to Tim Hardaway Jr. He pump fakes, tries a 3, gets fouled. The foul is not called. And you guys know me, and I'm typically very anti-blame the refs, blame the umpires, whatever. I think that the circumstances surrounding a game are so much bigger than an individual moment. And so I'm a little bit split on this. All of this is true. The Pistons should not have blown an 11-point lead. Okay. The turnovers were brutal down the stretch. They missed a million shots. They had good looks that they missed. And even before the fourth quarter, I mean, we go back to the first half. How many good looks did they have that they weren't making? I mean, Tim Hardaway Jr., who was so brilliant in the first half of game 3, in the first game at LCA, just wasn't making anything. They start to come alive in the second half. Then they get cold in the fourth quarter. That's all true. And as I said earlier, I think it's a prime example of experience on one side, paying dividends compared to a team that just hasn't been in this situation very often. I mean, the Pistons hadn't made the playoffs in 6 years, and a whole lot of guys on this roster had never even sniffed the postseason. So all of that is true. With that said, Hardaway Jr. got fouled, and that was a terrible no call. And I'm not somebody who has ever abided by the belief of, like, you can't call something late in a game. You can't let the game be decided on a whistle. No, if something's a foul, it's a foul. If it's a foul 5 seconds into the game, it's a foul with 5 seconds left in the game. That doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, call things with relative consistency. What was annoying is that for a majority of the first half of that game, that was an end of the second half. That was a really physical ball game. And I actually give the officials a lot of credit for not calling a lot. And I don't know what compels guys to do this. I really don't, because you see it in college, you see it in the NBA. There was this stretch where everything was being called a foul. And you got the impression, you go hard at the basket, you pull a pump fake like what Hardaway Jr. got in that final possession, somebody's going to get a call. They didn't. He missed the shot. Knicks escape after Pistons blow an 11-point lead, and now, is the series? Yeah, the series is done. I don't want to blow smoke up anybody's butt. It maybe even if they find a way to survive Game 5, I have a hard time believing they're winning 2 games in Madison Square Garden. And we'll do the postmortem when it happens, because it has been a wildly successful Pistons season, and people who are much more in depth when it comes to NBA stuff can break it down. I guess in terms of my emotions watching it, the biggest takeaway is I don't think the NBA has the best playoffs. In fact, it doesn't, because it's too goddamn long. But it has the biggest separation between regular season and postseason, because these were energetic, fun, entertaining ball games. And I don't feel that way about regular season NBA. And there was this brief moment. It reminded me a bit of the Tigers last year, and I'm not trying to knock anybody down, but the Tigers won a playoff series last year, so it's a bit different. But there was these brief moments in Game 3 and Game 4 that I'm sure, and I don't blame them, Pistons Twitter is gonna clip for the next year and say, this is what things can be. Because I'll be honest with you, I kind of started to wonder, because of how bad the Pistons had been for so long, how much are people going to care? What is the environment going to be like? And the fact is, we've known for a long time Little Caesars Arena is a top-notch facility, and Detroit's a top-notch fan base. They showed up, and it's so devastating that they weren't able to finish one of those games, because they have won Game 4. Pressure's now on New York. This is a huge season and huge series for the Knicks, and I don't think they came in super confident, right? So it's brutal that they weren't able to finish, because it felt like everything was kind of trending in the right direction for this to be a really competitive, fun series. And it has been a competitive series. But ultimately, I just don't really see a path forward in which the Pistons come out of this pushing it beyond 6 games at this point. And the idea of winning a series, I think, is basically impossible at this point. So juxtaposition there. I really was planning on starting by talking about the Tigers, and then he just got into this whole spiel about the Pistons. But I think, you can't go wrong either way. It's playoff basketball. I probably should start with it. But let's talk about the best team in the American League right now, and that is the Detroit Tigers. They're now 18-10. They finished the homestand with a 8-2 record. They will now go on the road to face Houston, having swept the Baltimore Orioles out of Comerica Park. They are playing at as high a level in the regular season as we've seen them play at in a long time. And like I said with this stuff, I do this show every week, so I don't want to come on here and simply recap every single game. What is working is a combination of what we expected to work and what we weren't sure would work. This pitching staff can compete with and play with any team in baseball. It is dazzling. Every one of these starters and every one of these relievers, sans Kenta Maeda, though he did have a scoreless inning yesterday, I don't want to face him. It is strike after strike after strike. Pitchers are going deep into games. They're getting swing and miss. Scuba with 11 strikeouts on Sunday. Mize with a 1-run outing on Saturday. You had Montero in that spot start giving up 1 run. You turn it over to the pen, and there's this, as I've talked about, a bullpen diversity where you have Holton, who's going to be cutting and sinking the ball as a lefty. You have Vest, who's going to be pumping 97, 98 with a fastball. You got Tommy Kahnle, who's going to be throwing 85% changeups up there. This team is turning into a matchup nightmare because there's not a whole lot of weaknesses that you can exploit. I think you have to give Michael Brodeur and the entire crew in Detroit that is involved in the hitting department a ton of credit, because it is a noticeable difference this year in terms of this team's approach at the plate, the at-bats that they have, and how much they aren't chasing. And that is reflected, and I don't want to spend an entire segment on this, that is reflected by what we're seeing from Javi Baez, because the chase rate is at a career low right now. Now, do I think Javi's going to hit 300 all year, guys? I still don't. I still can't. You're still not going to get me to buy in, right? But the role he's being asked to do is a significantly different role. And this is something that I have talked about. Like, as frustrated as I've gotten with Javi Baez in the past, some of that was not necessarily his fault. It was more the fault of the roster around him, because there was this time where they were hitting this guy third, right? And he didn't have any business hitting third. He wasn't a power hitter anymore. He wasn't seeing a lot of pitches. He was chasing a million pitches. That role has changed. And you give Harris and the powers that be, with the Tigers, a lot of credit for getting good players, right? Now, all of a sudden, Javi being that scrappy number 9 hitter is an appealing thing. And he has played a role for this. And I just think he's kind of a front runner. Like, I think when he sees that his team could actually be pretty good, like, I think his eyes get kind of wide. And he's been effective, but where it starts, it's just top to bottom. The approaches are so good. And this is something that I want to just hammer home, because they're going to have a rough stretch at some point. And it wouldn't shock me if that rough stretch is coming up on this road trip. I mean, they play some tough opponents. You never win in Anaheim. Houston's always tough. But you are doing this down several key pieces. And I was terrified. I was terrified of this first month of the season. And if you would have told me these are what Colt Keith's numbers are going to be, these are what Bo Brisky's numbers are going to be, these are the players who are going to be injured, and this is going to be this team's record, I wouldn't have believed you. And let's be honest, they just swept Baltimore. Carey had a terrible series. Kerry Carpenter couldn't hit a thing in this series against Baltimore. Riley Green homered and had a nice game on the second game of the doubleheader on Saturday, but he's still kind of going through it. You're getting production from Dylan Dingler and Zach McKinstry, who's playing like an all-star, and Javi Baez. Do I think those guys sustain it? No, but I know at some point we're going to see Matt Vierling in the lineup. We're going to see Parker Meadows and Wencel Perez in the lineup, and those guys will not be asked to do what they've been asked to do in this first month of the season, and you have to give AJ a whole lot of credit for that. And that's why going forward, people, okay, the next time somebody tells you that a manager doesn't matter in baseball, say that person's full of shit, okay? Because this team and the way they play and the way they prepare is a reflection of their manager. Okay, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. And one day, when he's retired and he's writing his memoirs, I would love to hear from AJ Hinch what he thought of this organization when he arrived versus where it's at now. Because I was always on the train of being like, I think this guy's really smart. I think he knows what he's doing. I think he can do some great things here. But I also think he was a pretty large piece, pretty large cog in a much bigger machine that he had no control over at points. And the player development and the scouting and the roster construction, you could have the best manager in the world. It doesn't matter with the caliber of rosters that they were putting together. That's changed. It's full of young, good players who have completely bought in. And on the pitching side, I mean, it's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming, the consistency that these guys are coming into games and just firing darts. You got Will Vest looking like one of the best relievers in baseball right now. He's had a sub 1.5 ERA over his last, 2.5 months of pitching in Major League Baseball going back to last season. Canley's been fantastic. It's just, this is a team that has turned into an organization that I'm very pleased with. And where that starts is with the prep. And I know that Scott Harris comes from San Francisco with the Giants, and the Giants have had a lot of change and evolution in their time. But when I think back to what made those Giants teams successful in the 2010s, which a lot of this was before Scott Harris was there, but I think there was carryover. They had great pitching. I mean, those staffs, Lincecum and Kane and Bumgarner. I mean, and the back end of the bullpens were always great. And Bochy knew how to manage them. Those were never great offenses. You had Parker Posey. Piper, no! Buster Posey, who was wonderful. But look at the 2010 Giants team that won the championship. It was fucking Cody Ross and Aubrey Huff, and Juan Uribe and Edgar Renteria when he was past his prime. But what they were was a team that was always prepared, and they were fundamental, and they were smart, and they would do the little things that mattered. Even when the Tigers were great here, okay, I'm talking the Dombrowski years, those teams were fun, and those teams were talented, and those teams had power. I can't go as far as to call them smart teams, okay, or God help you athletic teams. I mean, you got Prince Fielder at first base. You got Delman Young in left. You got Victor DHing. You have to move Miggy to third at one point. I mean, you had an outlier every so often like Austin Jackson in center, but in general, like, these weren't athletic teams. They weren't teams that ran the bases particularly well. When you have players that are not by definition speedsters who are doing the little things on the base paths, that's where prep comes in. Because I'm sorry, and I love these teams, and this was the golden age of Tiger baseball. I just have a hard time thinking that Jim Leland was sitting in the dugout or in the clubhouse showing these guys footage of fucking Delman Young going from first to third, collecting compilations of guys who are, bang bang plays at third base, like AJ talked about when we interviewed him in the offseason. It's a completely different organization, and they're playing at like 110 something win pace right now. That will not continue. I do think at some point the injuries catch up to them to a certain extent. And look, I'm sorry, at some point, this isn't going to be the 95 Braves in terms of their pitching staff. I mean, one of these guys is going to have to fall off, right? Like, at some point, it's just inevitable. One of these guys has a bad start, right? These things will happen. I just think this was the stretch of the season in which it was most important for the storm to be weathered. And not only has it been weathered, they have thrived. And they have caught the attention of a lot of people because they have found a way of wearing teams down with the way that they approach their at-bats. And it has to be psychologically. And we went through it on the other side. Because you guys remember when Verlander was here or some of the early Skubal years? Or let's go back to last season. Remember Reese Olson? When it was so frustrating and so demoralizing. When we would give up a run or two early and we would think to ourselves, this game is over. And Reese would go 7 innings, 1 earned, or Mize would go 6 innings, 2 earned, and we'd lose 2-1 or 2-0 just because we didn't have the offensive firepower, right? That level of frustration is what other teams are seeing right now because this team is pitching at such a high level that if you fall behind, and this team's been great at getting early leads, you fall behind 1 or 2-0, you might not get it back. I mean, when Javi hit that double, and I believe it was the second inning to put the Tigers up 2-0 on Sunday, Tigers weren't losing. Skubal wasn't giving up more than 2. He probably wasn't giving up more than 1. He ended up giving up 0 over 6. It's an organization revamped, and they're still in the building stage of this process. This is not a fully operational Death Star, right? This is like and I just saw this movie, the re-release. This is a Revenge of the Sith Death Star. Like, they're building it. It's not quite there, though. We're still waiting on the Clarks and the McGonagalls of the world, and it's a very fun thing because what I've talked about for years is, look, man, I'm going to pay attention to the farm system, and that's great, okay? It's wonderful to get top-tier prospects the same way that it is wonderful to get 5-star recruits in football and college basketball, right? But at the end of the day, what the average fan does is they go to the MLB app or they go to Twitter and they look at the record and see what the major league product is, and that's when they decide to buy in, okay? I could be wrong. When it comes to a major league team, I don't believe any fan has ever bought a ticket because of the farm system. Maybe to go watch a minor league game, but not to watch a major league game. This team, dating back to last season now, is giving these fans a reason to go to the park again and a reason to be invested. And regardless of what happens next, I am confident that this will be a very fun, competitive summer for Tiger baseball because I thought this was going to be one of the toughest stretches of the season. They've kicked ass. Nothing but praise. Feels good to say it. All right, last segment here as we are going to talk about what a weekend in sports. Woo, doggy. All right. NFL draft. Lions had their draft this week. Brad Holmes with another swing. It's one of the, I guess that's probably the good analogy to use because he took a swing. I wouldn't call it a home run, but I would call it a very stable single. Brad Holmes, to his credit, has absolutely earned the benefit of the doubt given how he's drafted over the last several seasons. I mean, this is a GM that has proven very often that he is the smartest guy in the room. So I'm not going to come on here and say, oh man, I thought they overshot with this pick or, undershot with this pick. The more time passes, because we talk about it in baseball all the time, player development matters in football as well. I have a lot of faith in the people in that organization, that they're going to get the most out of these players. And is every one of these picks going to be, a home run? Not necessarily. You get Tyleik Williams, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. Now, man, I think Brad Holmes loves guys in the offensive line the way that baseball organizations hoard pitchers. I mean, that is one thing you do not have to worry about is offensive line depth, right? And ultimately, I think it seemed like it was a perfect culture fit. I'm not going to run down every single guy here. I guess where people's frustrations lied was, what do you do to complement Aiden Hutchinson on the other side of the defensive line? And there's so much talk about, are they going to add an edge rusher? They ultimately do. They add the edge rusher from Boise State, I believe, in the sixth round. How much will you get out of him? We'll see. I came away from this draft not believing that is the final product of what they expect their defense to look like. I really think, and everyone's talking about this, but it seems to make so much sense. I really think now you make a run at re-signing Za'Darius the Nefarious. Look, Za'Darius Smith has had a wonderful career. Is he a Pro Bowl complete game wrecker? Not necessarily, but it's like a pitching rotation where you don't need an ace right now. Aiden Hutchinson is your ace. And Z gave him some really good reps last year when Hutchinson was out. But what's weird is we've had a lot of Hutch and we've had a lot of Za'Darius. We have not had them play together. I don't believe that Brad Holmes goes into next season saying the best way to complement Aiden Hutchinson on that defensive line is with a sixth round rookie. I think that they're going to make an attempt, whether it's through free agency or through trade. Besides that, look, I acknowledge the importance of the NFL draft totally, like 100%. I don't sit down and watch it. I watch sports, not people preparing for sports. And that's not to knock people who are into it. Like, it's a huge, huge deal. It's become this giant thing. Fucking billion people attended the draft in Detroit last year. I'm not even, trying to give people shit for it. It's just not something Tigers are playing, Pistons are in the playoffs. I'm paying closer attention to that. I do want to talk about two other things. One is Detroit related. Kirby Joseph, friend of the program, now the highest paid safety in the NFL. And one thing I struggle with, I jokingly said I struggle with the concept of money. That isn't necessarily true. I struggle with the concept of money as it pertains to the NFL because I know that this is a cap league. And so when I see the moves that the Lions have made, which are great, I want Amon-Ra, I want Penei, I want Jared Goff, I want this core to stick together. I just kind of threw out there, like, are they going to be able to re-sign Hutch? Are they going to be able to, maintain some of these other guys? And the general consensus is yes, and that will obviously probably involve contract restructuring at some point, which I think is such a great thing. I don't know, I think that's such a unique thing to do, and I wish other sports, I'm sure they do. I wish you could get that in baseball. I wish guys could restructure their contracts to a point where, okay, now we can afford to keep this guy. How cool would that be if you could allow for restructured contracts and still not have a salary cap? Now, it'll never happen, and I'm sure I'm just, talking out of my ass here, but it's just a man can dream, right? There have been rumors, I want to address this, I probably should have last week, about Jameson Williams potentially being on the trading block. I guess looking at it from and who knows, it might have been a smokescreen, but I understand to a certain point the perspective of the Lions have such an explosive offense. They have so many weapons that if there is a guy here who's quote unquote expendable, now that's a weird word to use for a guy who's as good as JMO, it probably is Jameson Williams. At the same time, I think if you traded him, the potential of that backfiring that's a high percentage chance of a backfire. And it would remind me a little bit of the Allen Iverson, Chauncey Billups trade, where it's like, look, I understand that maybe you haven't gotten over the hump in a while and you feel like you need some move to kind of shake you out of apathy, but the core here and the culture here is as good as it's ever been. It's better than it's ever been. And I really feel like you could rock things a little bit if you were to trade JMO, even if you felt like from an overall roster standpoint, you're improving. There is something about this group of Lions that you want to see them stick together and feel like if they're going to win, they're going to win together. So I would avoid it. I ultimately think they do avoid it. I think if something was like that was going to happen, probably would have happened in the draft. Again, could be wrong. We'll see. One more thing I want to talk about, because I can't stop thinking about this. I cannot stop thinking about this. So the story of the draft was not Cam Ward going number 1. The story of the draft was the drop of Shedeur Sanders, right? Shedeur Sanders projected to be as high as a top 5 pick, right? Maybe top 10. I think he dropped a little bit. Ends up going in the 4th or 5th round. I can't even remember. Dropping a pick number 140 something. You got Dylan Gabriel, who's like 5 feet tall, getting taken before him. A quarterback from Louisville, who I hadn't fucking heard of, right? Look, Shedeur Sanders sliding is a interesting story, and there's many things about it that are interesting with the Deion factor, and I understand all that. The story to me was not Shedeur Sanders dropping. It was Mel Kiper's reaction to Shedeur Sanders dropping, because there's a possibility, a high possibility, Shedeur Sanders ends up being a wonderful quarterback in the NFL. But I think to not understand why he dropped, now dropping as far as he did is crazy, but dropped like a little bit is strange to me. Because, and Mel Kiper Jr., I would call it unprofessional, right? Now, who am I to speak on professionalism, but Mel Kiper Jr. had a meltdown. I reposted the video. His voice was trembling. Mel Kiper Jr. on national television was on the verge of tears talking about Shedeur Sanders dropping. I mean, that's how passionate he was. And it's a weird thing, because I think ultimately what happened, and I read a comment on Reddit of all places, and Reddit loves me. Oh, boy, do they love me. Especially the Reddit from my last employer. Big fans. Somebody left a comment that I felt like was actually the perfect comment, which was, Shedeur Sanders ain't quite ready to come in yet and be a culture-changing, franchise-changing starting quarterback, and he's not worth the circus if he's going to be a backup quarterback. And I think that many teams made that decision. Now, I also think once you get to a point where a player is sliding, I think that there's kind of this weird game of chicken between organizations where nobody wants to be the one that's like, I'm not going to take him. I'm not going to take him. He's perfect for the Browns. Browns are perfect for him. But it's shocking that he slid as far as he did. But when you're talking about the most important position in sports, let's be real, the quarterback position in football is the most important position in all of sports. You need to check off all the boxes. And where somebody like a Mel Kiper, I think, gets it wrong is that he's talking about the intangibles. Is he accurate? Yes. Does he have a good arm? Yes. Is he mobile? Yes. Did he make a lot of mistakes? Not necessarily. Did he have a good offensive line? No, he didn't, but he was still very accurate, like capable of getting out of the pocket. He say didn't have any off the field issues. Like, what's there to worry about? And it's like, to me, that the whole he didn't have any off the field issues, that's a straw man argument. Okay. Because you don't have to be a criminal, right, for people to potentially see flaws in your quarterbacking ability. Okay? And especially when it comes to quarterbacks and highly touted quarterbacks, this stuff matters. And it's where I do actually think, and while I think we over evaluate prospects sometimes, I do think it's very important with QBs where you could have a guy on paper who has checked off every single box, right? Jamarcus Russell comes to mind right away, right? Jamarcus Russell, as people were talking about him like Uncle Rico talked about himself. I bet he could throw a pigskin over the mountains, right? He could, from his knees, he could throw a football 70 yards. Biggest arm that the NFL has seen coming into the draft ever. Can't miss prospect. Top tier guy coming out of LSU. And that dude gets signed. And you get signed and you get money. And money leads to success. And success changes you. Okay, it just does. And money changes you. And if you're going to commit to a quarterback long term, you need to be 100% sure that there's nothing around the edges that's going to prevent this guy from being the leader that your organization needs him to be. Now, maybe everybody just screwed it up. And Shedeur Sanders, look, this is the way things go in sports. This is why sports are awesome. He's going to have the opportunity to prove that. He's going to have the opportunity to prove 31 other teams wrong in his NFL career, right? But for somebody like Kiper, I had a laughing fit. I made a video about I couldn't stop laughing. This dude, because of Shedeur Sanders, and that's the other thing here. It's a very important thing to mention. This was a terrible quarterback class. Last year's quarterback class was great. Shedeur Sanders probably would have been QB 6, maybe in last year's draft, had he have been eligible, right? He wouldn't have gone ahead of Jaden or Caleb Williams or Drake May or JJ McCarthy or Penix. Maybe ahead of Bo Nix potentially, right? Like, and this guy, Mel Kiper, is on national television going to war saying, it's the greatest thing I've ever heard on television, saying the NFL has been clueless for 50 years about how they evaluate quarterbacks. That's absurd. And look, I think there is an argument to be had about, do we sometimes overanalyze? I get it, right? Like, to a certain point, we're measuring guys' arm's length. Like, okay, I understand it matters to a point, but how much does it? I get that. But to say that the entire league, a quarterback-driven league, has been clueless about how they evaluate quarterbacks, that's the quote of the year to me. That's the quote. I want that. If I die in 2025, which I have no plans of doing it, put that on my tombstone. The NFL's been clueless for 50 years how they evaluate quarterbacks. And Reese Davis was on set saying no one is arguing that. The Tigers kicked ass this weekend, and that was the highlight of my weekend. Okay, it was Mel Kiper having it was a full-on tantrum on national television for Shedeur Sanders. Good show today, guys. All right, that'll do it. Castellani 2014 on Twitter. CastellaniContent.com. That is getting updated every day. We're keeping the geese flowing with that because we've got the Tiger post games that are consistently being put out. Chris and Company episodes that are being put out. I'll say this being put out. We have a great, and I'm gonna use the G word here and say great. We have a great Chris and Company episode this week. We recorded an episode with Curtis Granderson last week. It is one of the best ones we've done. And just straight up, Curtis Granderson is a very easy person to interview because you ask him a question and he goes into story mode, and he has some great stories. I think that there are fans of multiple baseball organizations, especially the ones that he played for, that are really going to appreciate and like that episode. It was an honor to have him on. Can't wait to air that to the world. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Like us on YouTube. We're rolling right now. We got a good momentum going. The energy is good. The positivity is up. Tigers are playing great. Stick with us. Good things are happening. I'm very confident in that. Appreciate all your support, post games, everything. I'm having so much fun watching Tigers right now, and so much of that has to do with your contribution. One last thing, because I think Austin would call me out for this, and as well as he should. We are now affiliated with StubHub. So in the link to this podcast, I will have the link to StubHub. So we are now partnered with the Tigers and their StubHub affiliate. If you want to catch a Tigers game this summer, home game especially, the link to where you can get those tickets is going to be in the description here on YouTube. And it helps out me and Austin. So appreciate all you guys. Maybe a bit of a longer show today, but there was a lot to cover. Love you to death. Have a great weekend. Talk to you real soon. Have a great week, actually. Talk to you soon. Peace and happiness.